day one, maybe it was week two, where I pointed out that Bank of America says there's a 50-50 chance that we are living in a matrix, that there's at least two tech billionaires that are spending hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars, because they believe we are and they want to find a way out. So this is our thought experiment for a little while today. Bank of America controls trillions of dollars, and they're pretty well convinced, 50-50, that we're in a matrix right now, which means we're not in control of anything. We just think we are. False belief, false knowledge. And there's a couple of tech billionaires who are trying to prove that there's a rabbit hole to get us out of this so we can be really real ourselves. So the mind experiment I want to play with today, I have two fingers, is how many of you I'll start off. How many of you believe that we're in a matrix? Anybody believe we're in a matrix? Don't be afraid. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Anybody else? Your deepest fear is not that you're inadequate. Your deepest fear is that you're powerful beyond measure. It's the light and not the darkness. 4, thank you. Interesting. So the rest of you don't mind living in a dream world, right? Just once in a while you fall off a 2-story building. Oh well. 2,000-pound wall falls over on your head, you know. Oh well. You almost drowned 3 times, you know. Oh well. What makes you think we're in a matrix?
There's a study.
Hang on a minute. There's no right or wrong answers. We're thinking. That's the great idea of thinking. Go ahead.
Particles are different when you observe them versus when you test them. There's a test that shows that when you look at when you look at like particles, that they act differently than when they are just being.
Okay, that's cool. That's cool. You realize this is what we call this macro physics, and then the layer under it we call micro. It's called the atomic world, and then the layer under this we call the quantum. We have quarks, and then we get even further under this and we find strings of energy, string theory, and maybe multiverses. And they're already exploring it in a way that proves sort of that the world we live in is structured based on our ability to perceive it and understand it. We invent an electron microscope that magnifies things 1 billion times, and we see that this is mostly space. How come I can't put my hand through it? That doesn't make sense. Until we think about it enough and realize, well, my hand is made of the same, and it's in the same format that this is in, so of course this doesn't go through my hand any more than my hand goes through it. So there is information that might indicate there's more to reality. Am I right? Am I getting that? Okay, why do you think we're in a matrix?
It's just a fear of mine from the simple fact there's been a lot of weird coincidences in my life, and like a lot of things that I've said, and like somehow other people just somehow bring it up, and I haven't told them about it, and it's like, it's just weird.
It is weird that they would know that there's some connection there. But yeah, that's really cool. Back in the day, we used to go to the moon. They would put a wire down here and a wire up there, and they'd take this little plastic rocket, and they'd put what do you do on 4th of July, those little sparklers, and they'd put it in it, and Buck Rogers would go to the moon. Everybody said, that's never going to happen. And now we go to the moon. My dad passed, I don't know if I told you this or not. You need to learn French, déjà vu. We already heard that. My father passes away. My brother comes down here from New York for the memorial service, and we get together for breakfast, and he looks at me and he says, I saw this weird show last night on TV. It's called String Theory. Do you understand it? And I said, well, the math's above my pay grade, but the philosophy, sure. He says, what's it good for? And I said, nothing. Why'd you bother to watch it then? And I looked at him, I said, you know where steel belted tires came from? He said, no. I said, you know where little miniature, I'll give it back. You know where the transistors came from to power? This is more powerful than the computer that created the atom bomb. Literally, the atom bomb in New York. Now, those of you who don't come from New York, you don't understand streets. Streets are long in New York, and they're long this way too. And in a base, they filled the whole. It was the kind of computer you could walk into it and take out the transistor that had burned out and put a new one. And this has more computing power by a factor of maybe 1,000 than that huge computer had in the beginning, because we learned how to miniaturize things. You know where that came from? WD-40, a silicate, a lubricant. It all came from going to the moon. It all came from going to the moon. We had no idea in space, a vacuum, whether things would be lubricated or not. So we issued a challenge, and people came up with WD-40. Payload, how much you can put up in space, depended on size, so we miniaturized everything. Down here on the Earth, we have weather. And so much of the Earth has been weathered, and it's not sharp edges, but up on the moon, there's no weather. And we had no idea when we sent a vehicle up there, the moon rover, if it had rubber tires and it ran into extremely sharp edges, it would shred the tires in a heartbeat. It'd be like razors. So we again had a contest, and they developed steel belts inside, so if it tore up the tires, they could still move around because they had steel belts. But back in the day, what was it good for? Until we went to the moon, it was good for nothing. And Buck Rogers told us we could never get to the moon, and yet we ended up getting to the moon. So we know things that we don't understand. There are coincidences. Have you ever seen the Matrix movie? You remember when Neo was first with them? They're in that building, and the Sentinels are coming for them, and he goes by a doorway, and he sees a black cat, and then he sees it again. And he goes, that's weird. And what was the female's name in it again? His girlfriend, what's her name in the Matrix? Whatever it is, she says, what was weird? And he says, well, I just saw a black cat go by twice, which was a little, you guys never saw the Matrix? That was a little blip in the system. It realized that it was a computer-generated system, and it had a hiccup in it. And so the cat came by twice. When you see something twice, we go deja vu. I don't know if it's deja vu or not. I was just thinking of calling you. Really? Interesting. Yeah, I was thinking of calling you. Wow. When did you start thinking of calling me? About 6 o'clock. Wow, that's when I thought about calling you. Now that brings me back to multi-dimensions, that maybe there are 10 physical dimensions, and in the 5th dimension, thought can really travel. We don't see the thoughts. We have no way of comprehending that really happens, but how many people have had that happen? It happens on a regular basis, not to everyone, not all the time. Who else raised their hand for the Matrix? You did. Notice, you did. Go ahead.
Well, I don't know, sometimes if I'm driving, like, it just feels weird that everyone's moving in the same distance, but in the same way, but then, like, different things happen. Like, sometimes I'll be in the car and be like, okay, that person's gonna move there, and then chances are it happens, and you're just like, okay, like, that's really weird.
That's weird. And then people think you're weird, that you can know that before it happens. Anybody have friends that do that to them? And you have weird friends? They do things a little weirder than what's normal? Which one is the weirder one? He is. Oh, he is. Yeah, I knew that would happen. Just like, sure. Okay, so let's take the thought experiment a little further. For those of you who are non-believers, what if we were in a matrix? What if these tech billionaires can prove that we really are in a matrix? What does that mean to those of you who don't believe? Want to get out. Well, don't you have to first test their theory to make sure it's right? And let's say we do. So you want to get out. How many of you would want to get out of the matrix? Just a handful. The rest of you are content. Now, what Plato will say on Thursday is your ignorance is bliss. He's got this really interesting analogy. It's called the allegory of the cave that explains why most of us sit in bliss, and it just doesn't matter one way or the other. I'm not putting anybody down. It just doesn't matter. Who cares? I survived a 2,000-pound wall falling on my head, dropping out of a 2-story building, almost drowning 3 days. Who cares? I'm still here. I don't care. Would have been nice not to have to go through that, but So only a couple of us care. But if I could prove to you beyond a shadow of a doubt that you're in a matrix and you're not doing anything, you're just being fed a fantasy, or perhaps I can even say a lie. If I could prove that to you, how many would still want to be in the fantasy, would want to be in the matrix? Why?
Like, what if what's outside is worse, I guess?
That's the whole point of the thought experiment. What would be on the outside? And I think 24/7, I don't even dream like you guys do. I mean, even in my dreams, I'm coming up with this stuff. So I thought, well, in the Matrix itself, in the movie, they couldn't wait to get out. But what would be on the other side? Would you need to know what was on the other side before you made a quality decision to get out of the Matrix? Or would ignorance be bliss? Did I show that to you in here? Didn't I show that the guy eating the steak and he says, I know the steak isn't real, but one thing after 9 years I learned, ignorance is bliss. Because we don't know what's on the other side. What if a long time ago, visitors came looking for a food source, and they found it. And they realized that we can reproduce just like bunny rabbits. Most animals can only reproduce a couple of times a year. We can reproduce almost nonstop. And so they set up a system where we would reproduce nonstop. And they would put us in this system, and we call that the Matrix. And in order to not terrify us that we were going to be breakfast or lunch or dinner before too long, they would make this computer-generated world where we could just do just what we're doing now. Sit in a classroom and actually feeling like we're learning something important. And before you know it, they pull the plug and your lunch or your someone's dinner. It's all over. Don't worry about it. Ignorance is bliss. So that becomes the important question. What's it like outside the Matrix? Or would it matter at all? As long as we're just playing in a thought experiment, you can sit there and think he's, got up too early this morning, 2:30, I did. I've been thinking about this for way too long. It started 3 days ago. I was bored on Saturday. But what if the tech billionaires really do point out that we're in the Matrix? Let me think about it seriously for a minute. How many of you would be content to would not even be curious what's on the other side? To be free. See, because this Matrix is all based on, in our world, it's based on the ability to do what we want to as long as we don't interfere with someone else's freedom. If you're in my ethics course or my political science course, we'd call that libertarian political philosophy. The right to be free. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of. And who decides what you should do? Well, in our world, in our Matrix, we decide what we want to do as long as we don't interfere with someone else's freedom to do what they want to do. And so in this Matrix, you can do whatever you want to do as long as you don't interfere with anybody else's right to do what they want to do. And would that blissful ignorance be worth staying here, or is it important?